Go 1.21 is almost ready. Kind of like the walls in my office here. Anyway, this will be the 22nd major release of Go since Go started, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to look back at the history of Go and give you my list of the 10 best, most important Go releases up to now. Now, how do you rank Go releases? Because isn't each one better than the last? Well, maybe, but here's what I've decided to do. I'm looking at which of the Go versions added features that I would miss the most. Or put it another way, if a particular feature in that version would never have been added, would it bother me? So let's get started with the 10 best Go releases. Number 1 on my list is, of course, Go version 1. Go 1 was released on March 28, 2012. And of course, this wasn't really the first version of Go. There were some pre-release versions. Go was first announced publicly in November of 2009. So 2.5, almost 3 years later is when the first stable release, Go 1, was made. Now, the most important feature of Go 1, aside from it just sort of being the birth of stable versions of Go, I think is the compatibility promise. Now, the Go 1 compatibility document, I'll show you here, describes this promise, and this really hasn't changed, or if it has been very minor changes. So right here in the introduction to Go 1 and the release notes, we see the mention of the compatibility document, which outlines the compatibility promise. And in essence, it basically says that if you take code written for Go 1 or 1.1 or 1.2 or whatever, any 1.x version, it should continue to work on all future versions of Go 1.x. In other words, there should be no breaking changes introduced to the language for the Go 1 series. If you want to add a breaking change, we have to call that Go 2. So there have been a few minor violations of this compatibility promise since Go 1 was released, but for the most part, any code written for Go 1 should still work on Go 1.21 without any changes or very, very minor changes in corner cases. So what's the second most important Go release, in my opinion? That would be Go version 1.5, August 19, 2015. Go 1.5 was the first time you didn't need a C compiler to build the Go compiler. That's kind of cool, although that's not the most important feature. Honestly, I don't build Go from source very often, so I don't really care if I need a C compiler or anything else for that matter to do that. I just download the binaries. It's still a nice feature though. What I would really miss, though, from Go 1.5 are a few other features. Go 1.5 was the first version to make the environment variable Go max procs essentially unnecessary in most cases. Prior to Go 1.5, Go would run using a single CPU core by default, unless you change that value manually. As of Go 1.5, that was set to automatically detect the number of cores in your system, with a few exceptions, like if you're running in Kubernetes or something like that. Go 1.5 was really the first version of Go to automatically detect how many CPU cores you have and run on all of them. But the real reason I choose Go 1.5 as the second most important version of Go is that this is when vendoring support was added. Now, it was added only as an experiment, technically, in Go 1.5. It wasn't released as completely ready until 1.6, but with very few changes. Prior to Go 1.5, there was no way to vendor third-party dependencies. You had to handle all of that manually, which was a big pain in the rear end. By now, vendoring is mostly obsolete, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But if I had to go back to a time in the past and use Go, I would not want to go back before 1.5. Let's move on to my number 3 pick, the third most important release of Go. February 25, 2020, we're up to Go 1.14. Now, closely related to what I just talked about with vendoring, Go 1.14 added module support. Technically, modules were added in Go 1.11 as an experiment, but unlike the vendoring experiment, which just lasted one release iteration, this one took 1.5 years. Modules were a more complicated endeavor than vendoring, so it took a little bit longer to get those sort of kinks worked out. But finally, in Go 1.14, modules were ready for prime time, and I've been using them almost ever since, and they make my life a lot easier. So that's why I picked Go 1.14. Let's move on to number 4, May 13, 2013. I'm going back in time to Go 1.1. Now, there's a lot that happened in Go 1.1, as you can imagine. First off, it came out a little over a year after Go 1, so there was more than a year's worth of changes. It wasn't until Go 1.5 that the Go team started on their sort of regular 6-month release cadence. So it was sort of ad hoc changes up until then. And there were a ton of little fixes and tweaks, as you would expect. Go 1.0.0 hadn't thought of everything, and not everything worked perfectly, or there were some missing features. They added a ton of things in Go 1.1. I'm not going to talk about all of those because there's only one that really makes it stand out to me, and that was that they added the race detector. Now, if you're not already using the race detector, you should be, but it lets you run your tests with the race detector on, and it will detect data races. That is to say that if you have two or more concurrent Go routines trying to read from and write to the same memory simultaneously, the race detector can detect that and warn you and help you find those bugs. I run virtually all of my tests with the race detector on, and I encourage you to do the same. If you're not already, start doing it today. Let's jump back to a little bit more modern day version of Go. August 15, 2016, Go 1.7 was released. This makes my number 5 pick. Go 1.7 added a number of things. It added the ability to do subtests in the test suite. So if you've written tests in Go prior to Go 1.7, the t.run function didn't exist. So you had to either bundle a bunch of tests together in the same test, or you had to create a lot of high-level tests, which was kind of a nuisance. Go 1.7 also added the ability to do HTTP tracing, which isn't a commonly used feature, I don't think, but it's really useful if you're doing debugging. You can basically put hooks in to your HTTP client to do certain traces and give you debugging information about how your HTTP requests are being handled and served. But the real feature that I like in Go 1.7, the reason I consider this my number 5 pick, was context. Go 1.7 added the context package. I'm sure you've seen it before. Context.context. It kind of litters the entire code base in a lot of projects. It's the first argument for every function when it's used. And it does a couple of really important things. Of course, context can be used to pass data around, although that's sometimes discouraged. The thing I think it does that's really so profound, though, is the ability to propagate cancellation signals. So, for example, if you're building an HTTP server and the person browsing your website hits the stop button or their network dies or whatever, that signal to stop processing, because that request will go nowhere, can now be easily propagated throughout your entire call stack to tell your database to stop processing that request, for example. And that's something that wasn't easily done before. Of course, this is only a library change. This doesn't change the Go language itself. So you could have done this with a third-party library. And in fact, there was one. Golang.org/x/net/context did it as an experimental feature for a while. So that's one reason this isn't higher on my list. And a number of the other features I'm about to talk about sort of fit the same category. They're things that were possible in earlier versions of Go. They just weren't in the standard library yet, so there was maybe no standard way to do it. All that to say, context is a really important feature of Go. I use it all the time. If you're not familiar with it, you should become familiar with it. It's very powerful. My number 6 pick, September 3, 2019, Go 1.13. Lucky 13. One of the things they changed in this version was number literals. They added a whole bunch of new ways to represent octal and hexadecimal numbers, and they added the ability to put an underscore as a separator in your number literals that has no meaning. So you can easily separate thousands, digits, or whatever you want, for example. That's nice. Nothing wrong with that. But the real killer feature that I like, the reason I chose Go 113 as my number 6 spot, is for error wrapping. I have a number of videos on this topic because it's an interesting and subtle topic, although it's fairly simple on the surface. Mastering it can take a while. Have a look at the link up here to some of those videos or in the description as well. But in a nutshell, you can now, as of Go 1.13, wrap an error with additional context without losing the original error. Prior to Go 1.13, you could only sort of wrap the error string, and then you would lose any additional context in that error type, unless you were using a third-party library. There was a popular one, it's still around, called github.com/pkg/errors that provides some of the same functionality. It's mostly obsolete now, but that's why I pick Go 113. Let's jump back again now to February 16, 2017 for Go version 1.8. This was almost a Valentine's Day release. I wonder if the Go team works on Valentine's Day, because they've missed it by 2 days 3 times now. Maybe Go 1.22 will be released on Valentine's Day. It's coming up next February. We'll see. My fingers are crossed. Anyway, the new features in Go 1.8 that I care about, one was the addition of the sort.slice function. Prior to Go 1.8, if you wanted to sort a slice of things, you had to create a custom type and put some certain methods on that type so it could handle that, which was very cumbersome and annoying. As of Go 1.8, you could instead just call sort.slice and pass it a particular function that would do the comparison for you. So you didn't need a custom type for each of your slices that you wanted to sort. So that's a nice convenience. But the real reason I chose this version was for the addition of the graceful shutdown of an HTTP server. This is actually quite important, and I considered putting it higher in the list, but it really only applies to HTTP servers. So that's why I chose to put it here rather than higher, because it doesn't affect all applications. But if you are writing an HTTP server in Go, be sure to handle a graceful shutdown. That is to say, if you get a Control-C, for example, or your Kubernetes cluster tells it to shut down, or whatever, you want it to shut down gracefully so that it can stop serving requests. It doesn't serve a half a request, or it doesn't just shut down in the middle of writing a database record, things like that. So Go 1.8 made it easy to do this. Prior to 1.8, there were some third-party libraries that tried to do it, but it was really icky and very cumbersome because to do it properly really needs to integrate with the standard library. So Go 1.8 added that feature, and that's why I chose it. Let's jump to February 16, 2021, fairly recent release, Go 1.16. So the version immediately before this, Go 1.15, 6 months earlier, gave us a small preview of the feature that I think is most important here. That was when they started allowing you to embed time zone data in your Go executable, so you didn't need to depend on that data being available on your operating system or your Docker container to use time zone information. Go 1.16 took that a big step further and made it possible to embed any arbitrary file in your Go executable. And as part of that, they added a new interface called the fs.fs interface, which allows a sort of abstract file system read-only access to an arbitrary file system, including these embedded files. So you can access an embedded file as a byte string, as a string, or as an instance of this fs.fs interface, which gives a lot of flexibility when embedding things. You can embed CSV files or SQLite files or text files or whatever you want. Of course, this was possible before Go 1.16 using a third-party library. Go bin data was the most popular one, probably. There were many forks of it. But you had the problem that whenever your source files changed, you had to remember to run Go generate again to regenerate the Go source that embedded the data. That's no longer necessary with Go 1.16's embed capability. So really nice feature. If you're not using it, you should be. We're getting close to the end. I'm on my number 9 pick, so just 2 more to go. But I decided to pick a version that's not even out yet for number 9, and that's, of course, Go 1.21. There's a lot coming up in Go 1.21. One of the anticipated features is profile-guided optimization, which was added as an experiment in 1.20. It's now ready for prime time, and it can improve the performance of certain programs by significant amounts, 5%, 10% maybe. So that's a really cool feature. We have some new built-ins coming up in the language, min, max, and clear. Min and max are kind of overdue, I suppose. Now that we have generics in the language, it's easier to support that. But the feature I really like about Go 1.21 is the new slog package. Structured logging is something that I do in virtually every service I write, and I've been using other packages like Logris or ZeroLog, but they all have different ways of handling things. Having this in the standard library is going to be great. It's going to help standardize this stuff so you don't have to learn a new logging library every time you start on a new project. So I'm really excited about this. This is another one of those things that was possible, obviously, before it's in the language, but now life is just going to be better. So let's move on to my last pick, my 10th favorite Go release. There's many others that deserve mention, of course, but I don't want to do a video about 22 different Go releases. So I'm going to stop at 10. Number 10, March 15, 2022, Go 1.18. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, generics, that's why he picked this one. Generics are great. Wait, shouldn't that be higher in the list? That's not why I'm picking this one, actually. I'm sorry. I actually don't like generics. I've never had a reason to use them. That will probably change as things like min and max are introduced to the language. But so far, I've never needed generics. And so I didn't miss them before they were there. And now that they are there, I've never actually used them either. So that's not why I'm picking it. The reason I picked Go 1.18 is because of the addition of fuzz testing. Now, I haven't actually used fuzz testing either, but I feel a little bit embarrassed about that. Maybe I'll make a video soon on that topic. Fuzzing is essentially the ability to send semi-random inputs to your program or to your functions to see how they respond. The goal, of course, being to help discover if you have bugs or problems you need to fix with your code. So it's a way to stress test your code in ways that you wouldn't necessarily, at least not quickly, under normal usage, to find bugs before they're exposed to the public. So that's why I chose Go 1.18 for number 10. So there you have it. Those are my 10 favorite releases of Go up till now. What do you think? What did I miss that you think should have been there? What did I put in there that doesn't belong? Let me know your opinion in the comments. I would also like to invite you to subscribe to my daily mailing list, Boldly Go Daily, where I talk about the Go specification in bite-sized chunks and explain it to you. And very soon we'll be going into the changes in Go 1.21. So if that's something that interests you, be sure to subscribe. Head over to boldlygo.tech/daily. Otherwise, I hope to see you in another video soon. Until then, make it go.